Welcome back to Eagle Eye Apache. Today, I want to share a story about a woman whose life was torn apart in a single morning. A woman who would be tested in fire, fear, and choices she never dreamed she would face. Her name was Sarah Collins, and this is where her journey begins. At dawn, Sarah awoke to something wrong. It wasn't the sound of wind through the pines or the creak of the cabin walls. It was a scream high, sharp, and filled with terror. Her eyes flew open. Smoke burned her throat before she even sat up. Then came the thunder of hooves, pounding across the earth, and the crack of gunfire echoing against the mountains. In that moment, the world she had always known shattered. She stumbled barefoot from the rough bed she shared with her widowed father and pushed open the cabin door. What met her eyes froze her in place. The settlement was in flames. Roofs collapsed into sparks. Smoke clawed at the sky. Women clutched their children only to be torn away. Men swung rifles and axes in desperate defense. But it was useless. They were outnumbered. Swallowed by a storm of shadows, moving swift and deadly through fire and chaos. The figures emerged, Apache warriors, painted in black and red, their eyes sharp, their movements merciless. They were not men to be bargained with. They were the storm itself. Sarah's heart pounded so loud it drowned out her thoughts. She searched for her father, and through the smoke, she saw him, face streaked with ash, rifle in hand. Calling her name, he ran toward her. But in an instant, steel flashed. A cry rose, and then silence. Her father crumpled to the ground. No, her scream tore from her throat, raw and broken. But it was swallowed by the roar of fire. The world collapsed around her. Everything she loved, everything she had clung to for safety, turned to ash in a single heartbeat. Before she could run, a hand like iron clamped around her wrist. She twisted, kicked, struggled, but the grip only tightened. She looked up and met the eyes of her captor. His face was painted with black and red earth. His jaw hard as stone. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes held no mercy, only purpose. He dragged her through the chaos, past burning homes and fallen bodies, until she stumbled against the ground. Ropes bit into her wrists. In moments, she was tied to the back of a horse. The warrior mounted, spurred the animal forward, and Sarah was pulled away, carried into the wilderness as her home vanished behind her. She twisted for one last glimpse, desperate to cling to something familiar. But all she saw was smoke rising into the morning sky. The sound of her father's last cry, echoing in her memory. That was all that remained of her old life, smoke and silence. The days that followed blurred together. The sun beat down on her by day, merciless and unrelenting. The cold bit into her bones by night. Her wrists ached from the ropes, her throat raw from thirst. Other captives had been taken, too. But not all were kept. Some were abandoned on the trail, left behind in silence, their fates uncertain. Sarah alone remained guarded, her every step watched. Why? The question gnawed at her, clawed into her chest. But no answer came. The Apache spoke in words she could not understand, their tones sharp, their glances meaningful. She knew only that she was different, that for reasons she could not grasp, she was spared. Fear wrapped itself around her like chains. It lived in her lungs, in her heartbeat, in the constant dread that each moment might be her last. The land grew wilder the deeper they rode, Cliffs rose around her, towering walls of stone. Pines stood like sentinels, their branches whispering secrets she could not hear. Eagles wheeled overhead, their cries echoing through the vastness. Then, at last, the warriors slowed. They descended into a valley hidden between ridges. Smoke curled from low fires. Women moved among the lodges, their faces guarded, their eyes sharp. Children peered from behind them, pointing, whispering. Warriors turned their heads as Sarah was led through. And in every gaze she felt judgment, not pity, not desire, but something colder, something heavier. She was given food, water, a blanket against the night. But no freedom. It was not kindness. It was not mercy. It was waiting, waiting for something she did not yet understand. That night, Sarah lay curled on the rough ground of a lodge, set apart from the rest. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her face, the smell of smoke still clinging to her hair. The memory of her father's fall replayed in her mind, a wound that cut deeper with every heartbeat. She tried to weep, but no tears came. Only fear. Only the endless weight of the unknown. She had been carried into a hidden world, a valley guarded by cliffs and shadows, a place where she belonged to no one and nothing, not even herself. And though she could not know it yet, this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning, for Sarah Collins, daughter of the frontier, had stepped across a threshold from which she could never return. The fire that destroyed her home had forged something new, something untested, something waiting within her. And in the days to come, she would discover that she had not simply been taken captive, she had been chosen. The days passed in a blur of hunger and dread. Sarah moved like a shadow through the Apache camp, never free, never forgotten. The people watched her, always children with curious eyes, women with suspicion, warriors with guarded silence. Though they gave her food, though they allowed her to breathe another day, she was not one of them. She was an outsider, a trespasser in a world she did not understand. Then, one night, her fate shifted. The moon hung high, a pale lantern against the black sky, when two women appeared at the door of her lodge. Their faces were stern, their movements purposeful. One gestured sharply. Sarah understood without words. She was to come. Her heart thudded as she followed them through the valley. Fires burned low, sending smoke and sparks into the night air. The camp was quieter now, though here and there a drumbeat pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of the land itself. At the center of the camp, she saw them, the elders. They sat in a circle around the council fire, their faces carved with age, their eyes deep with knowledge. Their voices were low and steady, their language flowing like water Sarah barely understood. The flames painted them in gold and shadow, making them appear less like men and women, and more like figures from another world. Her pulse quickened. This was no trial, not for punishment, not for death. She felt it in the way the fire burned, in the way every gaze weighed heavy upon her. Something else was being decided. Words rose and fell, fragments breaking through the veil of language she did not know. She caught pieces: warrior, fever, strength, and one name, spoken with reverence: Kael. The sound of it stilled her breath. She had heard it whispered even among her own people on the frontier. Kael, the fiercest Apache warrior, a man whose raids left settlements burning, a man who, in settler tales, was more myth than flesh. a shadow who struck and vanished. To his enemies he was terror, to his people he was legend. They called him the Wolf of the Cliffs, and now he was broken. She strained to follow the words, until one of the older women, her English halting but clear enough, turned to Sarah and spoke. The wolf is wounded, his body weak. His fever burns. Sarah blinked, struggling to understand why this was being told to her. The woman's gaze did not soften. No woman of the people will tend him. He is too proud. If he wakes to see one of us when he is broken, his spirit will shatter. It will dishonor him and dishonor us. The words sank like stones in Sarah's chest. A question trembled on her lips. But before she could speak, the woman continued, "You will go." Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her. She shook her head once, small and desperate. I don't understand." The woman's dark eyes flashed, sharp as flint. "You are not of us. You will not shame him. You will bring water. You will wash his body. You will see him where no eyes are allowed." Her throat tightened. She could barely form the words. "And if I refuse?" The woman's reply was quiet, but final as the strike of a blade. "Then you will die." The fire popped, sending sparks into the night air. Sarah's breath came ragged, her heart a hammer in her chest. To be forced into such closeness with the fiercest of them all, a man spoken of as a beast, a killer, a wolf. Her skin prickled with terror. She looked from face to face, searching for mercy, for any sign that this was a cruel jest. But the elders' expressions did not waver. Their decree had been spoken. When they dismissed her, Sarah stumbled back from the firelight, her steps uneven, her stomach twisting. The two women guided her toward the edge of the camp, where the dark pressed heavy. Only then did her composure break. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her face. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Though he was gone, she thought of her home ashes on the wind. And now this unbearable order. She would be sent into the presence of Kael, the fiercest of them all. He was more than a man. He was the wolf of the cliffs. Untamed, indomitable, feared by enemies and revered by his own. She had been ordered to touch him, to tend him in his weakness, when even his kin would not. Sleep did not come that night. She lay curled in her lodge, eyes wide, heart racing. Every sound in the darkness seemed louder, the rustle of the wind through the pine trees, the crackle of dying embers, the distant cry of an owl. Her thoughts circled endlessly. She prayed the dawn might not come, that perhaps Kael would slip away into death before she was forced to look into his eyes, that the elders might change their minds, see the cruelty of what they demanded. But morning always comes, when the first pale light touched the ridges. The flap of her lodge was thrown back. The same older woman stood waiting, her expression firm, her words clipped and final. "You come." Sarah's stomach clenched. Her body trembled as she rose to her feet. They pressed a clay bowl and a rough cloth into her hands, leading her toward a stream that gurgled cold and clear. She scrubbed the bowl with shaking fingers, filled it with water, and clutched the cloth as though it were both weapon and curse. The rushing water should have calmed her, but instead it mocked her dread, for she knew what awaited. As she was led back through the camp, eyes followed her again. Warriors, women, even children, they all turned to watch. Their gazes pressed down like a weight she could not shake. She could almost hear their thoughts. "This outsider will go where none of us dare. This woman will step into the lodge of the wolf, Her steps slowed as she drew nearer. The lodge was set apart, built with greater care, as though it marked the man inside as someone above the rest. Smoke rose from a fire outside, curling into the pale morning sky. The air itself seemed charged, heavy, alive. At the entrance, her escort stopped. The older woman pointed toward the flap. "You go," she said, voice flat. "He waits." Sarah's hands trembled so hard the water sloshed against the rim of the bowl. She swallowed, her throat dry as dust. I can't." The words slipped out. A whisper of fear. The woman's eyes narrowed, sharp and merciless. "You do, or you die." Sarah's chest tightened. Her knees felt weak, but her legs carried her forward anyway. She pushed aside the flap of the lodge and stepped into the dim interior, her heart racing like a trapped bird. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and bitter herbs. And there, on a bed of woven mats, lay Kael, the wolf of the cliffs, even in weakness, even in fever. His presence filled the space like fire, and Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty her life had just entered a new trial, one from which there would be no turning back. At dawn, Sarah was summoned. The cold air stung her skin as she stepped from the lodge. A bowl of water cradled in her trembling hands. A coarse cloth draped across her arm. Around her, the camp stirred awake. Smoke drifted from dying embers. Children whispered from behind their mothers. And warriors sharpened their knives in silence. Every gaze followed her, not with warmth, not with pity, but with judgment. The outsider, their eyes seemed to say it. She will go where none of us dare. She will step into the presence of the wolf. Her steps slowed as the women led her toward the lodge, set apart from the rest. Her stomach tightened, her throat dry as dust. The closer she came, the more the air seemed to change, thick with expectation, charged with something unseen. The lodge loomed before her, larger, sturdier, its frame marked by care, as if to honor the man who lay within. Outside, a fire smoldered, smoke curling into the pale sky. The older woman who had pressed the bowl into Sarah's hands stopped and pointed. "You go. He waits." Sarah's heart hammered. The bowl shook, water sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Her knees begged her to turn, to run. But she remembered the words spoken the night before. "You do, or you die." There was no escape. She drew a breath, pushed back the flap, and stepped inside. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of smoke, sweat, and herbs. Shadows danced along the curved walls where a low fire burned at the center. And there he was, Kael, the wolf of the cliffs. He lay stretched upon a bed of woven mats and furs, his chest bare, rising and falling with labored breaths, even weakened, even drenched in fever. His presence struck her like a blow. His body was carved with muscle, the map of battle etched across his skin in scars, lines of fire, ridges of survival. His long black hair spilled like a raven's wing across the furs. But it was his eyes that froze her. They were open, sharp, unflinching, piercing her as though he could see not only her face, but the marrow of her bones. She had expected a man unconscious, too weak to notice. Instead, she found herself caught in a gaze that stripped her bare. Her hands shook so badly, the water nearly spilled. She knelt quickly, setting the bowl at her side, grateful for the distraction of movement, anything to escape the weight of his stare. Then, His lips curved, just faintly. "The elders send me a child." His voice was low, roughened by fever, yet still edged with pride. Still carrying the authority of a man who had never bowed to anyone. Sarah's breath caught. Her fear flared. But so did something else. Anger. "I am not a child," she whispered. Though her voice quivered, one of his dark brows lifted. And for a fleeting instant, something flickered in his eyes. Not amusement, not cruelty, but something close. Then, he turned his face away, dismissing her, as though she were beneath him. Relief washed through her brief. Fragile, but it did not last. She knew what she had been ordered to do. Her fingers trembled as she dipped the cloth into the bowl, wrung it out, and reached toward him. Her hand hovered above his skin, fear tightening her chest. His body radiated heat, the fever burning in him like fire. She hesitated. What if he struck her? What if he saw her touch as insult, as intrusion? But before she could pull back, his voice cut through the silence. "Do it." The command was sharp, brooking no argument. Sarah flinched, but forced her hand forward. The damp cloth pressed gently against his shoulder, sliding across his fevered skin. His muscles tensed beneath her touch. Pride, warring with weakness. Every stroke of the cloth felt as though it stripped away not only sweat and heat, but the armor he wore like legend. And still, he let her. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence with its restless hiss. Sarah focused on her task, willing her hands to steady. Though her heart thundered, she moved the cloth slowly, carefully, across the map of his scars. Each line told a story of battles survived, of death defied. She could not help but wonder about the men who had left these marks upon him, and the ones who had not lived to tell their tale. Fear gnawed at her. But something else stirred too. Something dangerous. In the shadows. As she touched the flesh of the man her people had called a monster, she glimpsed fragility. He was not a ghost. Not a legend. He was a man. Flesh and blood. Scarred. Burning with fever. Her breath trembled as she wrung out the cloth once more. Kael's eyes opened again, locking onto hers with fire. She froze, caught between terror and something nameless. In that silence, Sarah realized the truth. This was no ordinary task. The elders had not sent her to serve only his body. They had sent her to endure him, to face the fiercest Apache stripped of armor, to survive the weight of his gaze without breaking. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he could hear it, and yet her hands moved. Steady now. Not from courage but from necessity. The cloth slid across his chest, cooling his fever. His eyes followed her every movement, dark and unyielding. The wolf of the cliffs had not devoured her. Not yet. But Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that she had stepped into a trial more dangerous than fire, more consuming than chains. For fear was no longer her only companion. Something had shifted. Something she dared not name. And in the quiet of that dim lodge, Sarah Collins understood the true battle was only just beginning. The days became a rhythm Sarah never chose, yet could not escape. Each morning she was led to Kael's lodge, a bowl of water in her trembling hands, a cloth hanging limp from her fingers. Each morning she entered the dim, smoke-scented space, where the fiercest warrior of the Apache lay weakened yet unbroken. At first, she told herself it was a chore, a task to be endured. Nothing more. She would kneel by his side, wring out the cloth, press it against his burning skin, and leave as quickly as they allowed. But it was never that simple. For every time she touched him, the lines of his legend blurred. The cloth swept across his chest, and she saw scars, long ridges that carved their way over muscle, hardened by years of battle. Jagged marks on his ribs, puckered wounds on his shoulder, a narrow white line across his forearm. Each one was not just a mark of pain, but proof of endurance, proof that he had walked through fire, steel, and fury again and again and lived. And she could not look at him without wondering. Who had struck those blows? How many had tried to kill him, only to fail? How many had fallen beneath his hand? Her people had painted him a beast, a shadow that swept across the frontier, merciless and wild. Yet here, beneath her hands, he was flesh, scarred. Yes, dangerous. Yes, but also fragile, in ways no one else was ever allowed to see. At first, he resisted her, his body tensed when her touch came too near, muscles hardening as though he could will himself beyond her care. His eyes followed her hands with suspicion, a wolf wary of fire. Sometimes he muttered in his own tongue, sharp words she could not understand. And once, when his English returned, he told her flatly, "You do this because they order it, not because you have courage." The words stung like a lash. And yet Sarah did not falter. She answered quietly, almost defiantly, "If I had no courage, I would have run the first night, even if it meant they killed me." Something flickered in his eyes, then so brief, she almost doubted it. Not softness, not kindness, but something that saw her, something that measured her anew. After that, his resistance changed. He no longer tried to stop her. His pride burned. Yes, but his body did not recoil. When she pressed the cloth to his brow, he closed his eyes, breath easing. When weakness overcame him and his hands trembled, he tried to hide it, but she saw. And when his fever broke and strength began to return, his gaze lingered on her differently, not with lust, not with hatred, but with something else, something dangerous. Silence filled the lodge each time she entered, heavy as stone, yet alive with an unspoken charge. She would kneel by his side, the fire crackling softly, the cloth whispering against his skin. He would watch her, eyes dark and unyielding, measuring every breath she took. At first, she feared the silence, desperate to break it with words. But as days passed, she realized the silence itself was its own language. In it, there was no pretense, no disguise, only the truth of presence. And in that silence, something shifted. The warrior she had feared became more than the tales whispered on the frontier. She saw the man beneath the wolf, a man who carried scars not just on his body, but on his soul, a man who bore the weight of a people, yet still bled, still burned with fever, still endured. Her fear did not vanish. It lived in her still, curling in her stomach each time his gaze pierced her. But beside the fear grew something else, a pull she could not name. She told herself it was pity. She told herself it was duty. Yet in the quiet, when her hand lingered too long, when her eyes traced the line of a scar across his chest, she knew pity was not the word. Danger, that was the truth. The danger was no longer only in his strength, his legend, his tribe. The danger now lay in the bond forming between them, a bond neither had spoken aloud, yet both could feel in the silence. One evening, As she dipped the cloth and drew it across his arm, her voice slipped free without thought. "So many scars," she whispered. "How have you endured so much?" His eyes snapped to hers, sharp as a blade. For a moment she feared she had crossed a forbidden line. But then he answered, his voice low and rough, carrying the weight of years. "Each scar is a story. Each story is blood. I endure because I must." He paused, gaze burning into hers. "Do you turn your eyes away from them?" Her throat tightened. Slowly, she shook her head. "No. I only wonder how one man can carry so much." Something unreadable flickered across his face. He looked away, closing his eyes, as though to end the conversation. But Sarah's heart pounded, her mind turning with unspoken thoughts. That night, as she left the lodge, the air outside felt different. The camp was the same, fires burning low, children laughing faintly in the distance. But within her, something had changed. She had gone to Kael as a captive, forced to tend a wounded enemy. Yet each day, each scar, each silence had stripped away the mask of legend and left behind the truth of a man, and with that truth came a bond dangerous, forbidden, and growing stronger with every touch of her hand. Sarah knew the elders had bound her to a task that could never remain hidden. For what was forming between her and the wolf of the cliffs was no longer duty. It was something far more perilous. Night fell heavy upon the valley, its silence broken only by the whisper of the wind and the faint beat of drums echoing somewhere in the dark. Sarah sat just outside the lodge where she had tended Kael once again, her hands raw from wringing the cloth, her heart aching with questions she dared not ask. She had grown used to the rhythm of this strange captivity, the bowl of water, the damp cloth, the weight of his eyes upon her, but her spirit was restless. She felt the ground shifting beneath her, though she could not yet name why. That was when she heard them, the elders' voices, low and steady, carried across the night air. She stilled, every muscle tensing. Their words were not meant for her, yet she understood fragments, pieced together from the scraps of their tongue she had learned. She leaned closer, the shadows cloaking her as she listened. They spoke of Kael, not as a man, not as a warrior, but as something more, the wolf of the cliffs. One elder said, his voice brittle with age, "He carries the spirit of our ancestors." Another answered, grave and reverent, "His strength binds us. If he falls, the tribe falters. His body is our survival." Sarah's breath caught. The oldest woman among them spoke next, her words fierce despite their tremor. "No woman of our blood may see him broken. To do so would unbalance the spirit he carries. Only an outsider may touch what is forbidden." A chill swept through Sarah, sharper than the mountain wind. Her hand flew to her mouth, as though to hold the truth inside. Now she understood. She was not tending him because she was expendable. She was tending him because she was set apart, because she was not of them. She was the only one allowed to see what no one else dared. Her heart pounded in her ears. She realized then the danger she carried, not just the secret of Kael's wounds, but the knowledge of his sacred place among his people. If anyone suspected how much she had seen, how much she now knew, her life might not be spared a second time. That night, when she returned to his lodge, her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the bowl. The firelight flickered against Kael's scarred skin, his eyes glinting dark as obsidian. He noticed instantly. "You are afraid," he said, his voice low, steady. She almost laughed at the simplicity of it. Afraid. The word was too small. What coursed through her was more than fear. It was dread, awe, confusion. She set the bowl down, her throat tight. For a long moment, she hesitated. Then the question broke from her lips, trembling and raw. Why me? Why did they send me to you? Kael's gaze sharpened, his expression hardening into a wall. For a breath, she thought he would not answer. Then, his voice cut the air like a blade. Because no one else can. Her heart hammered. She pressed, surprising herself with her own boldness. That's not true. The women here, they could help you. But they won't. They say it is forbidden. His jaw clenched, his eyes burning into hers. Forbidden, he repeated. The word carrying a weight she could not measure. They believe you carry something more than scars, she whispered. Her words shook, but she could not stop them now. They say you bear the spirit of the wolf, that your life belongs not just to you, but to your people. Silence filled the lodge, heavy as stone. The fire cracked, throwing shadows across his face. Kael did not move, did not breathe. His eyes narrowed, fierce and unrelenting. Sarah thought he might strike her down for daring to speak what was not hers to know. But when he finally spoke, his voice was not thunder. It was low, almost bitter. They see me as more than a man. They say my visions guide them. They say my strength holds them. But visions are only shadows. Scars are the truth. Her breath caught. He had not denied it. He had admitted what the elders whispered in secret, that he bore a burden greater than flesh and blood. Why tell me this? She asked softly, daring to meet his gaze. His eyes held hers, dark, unwavering. Because you already see. You have looked when no one else would. You have touched what no one else dares. You know now what no other eyes have ever known. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She felt the world tilt beneath her, the firelight spinning into shapes she could not hold. He was right. She had crossed into a place no one else was allowed. She had seen him, his scars, his weakness, his spirit, and now carried the secret like a brand upon her soul. And with it came the weight of danger. For in that moment, Sarah understood the truth. She was no longer merely a captive. She was no longer just a servant obeying orders. She had become the keeper of Kael's most guarded secret. A secret that could destroy them both. As she bent once more to dip the cloth in the water, her hands steadier now, though her heart still raced. She realized there was no turning back. Every stroke of the cloth, every glance, every silence that stretched between them, bound her tighter to him, not by rope, not by fear, but by a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. And though she did not yet know it, the fire between them had only begun to burn. The days wore on, each one weaving Sarah deeper into the rhythm of the camp, deeper into the lodge where the wolf of the cliffs lay recovering. His fever had broken, his strength was returning, and with it, his voice sharpened. He no longer endured her presence in silence. He began to test her. Kael's words struck like arrows, swift and unyielding. Your people, he said one morning as she wrung out the cloth, live behind wooden walls, afraid of the wind, afraid of the dark. They would not last a single season in the mountains. Sarah stiffened, her hand pausing in midair. His eyes burned, daring her to respond. She wanted to stay quiet. She wanted to keep her head bowed, to let his words slide past her like water over stone. But something in her rose against the insult. Sharp and unwilling to bend, she lifted her chin. And yet, I am here," she said softly but firmly. "Alive in your lodge. Longer than you thought I would last." His gaze narrowed. A flicker of something unreadable passed over his face. And for a moment, the silence was heavier than the words. Then his voice dropped, cold and certain, alive, but not free. "A rabbit in a snare still breathes." The words pierced her. They reduced her to prey. A creature caught and waiting for death. Her throat tightened, but anger sparked, hot and steady. "If I were only a rabbit," she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and fire, "I would be dead already." For the first time, his expression shifted. A sound escaped him. Not quite laughter. Not quite scorn, a rough exhale that carried the edge of both. His eyes studied her, sharper now, as though she had revealed something he had not expected. "You speak like a child who has never seen a wolf's teeth," he said. The fire in her chest flared. Before she could stop herself, her words struck back. "And you speak like a man who thinks no one has the courage to look at them." The lodge fell into silence. Her own breath rushed in her ears, the weight of what she had said crashing down. No one spoke to him this way. Not his people. Not his warriors. And certainly not a captive woman with no power. She half expected him to lunge at her, to silence her defiance with force. But Kael did not move. He only stared. Eyes dark. His silence heavier than any outburst. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost wondering. "You have fire. Too much for a rabbit." Sarah's cheeks flushed, though she could not say if it was fear, pride, or both. She looked down quickly, dipping the cloth again into the water to steady her hands. But the air between them had changed. Their words became battles, fierce and relentless. Each day he challenged her. He mocked the settlers, their plows, their fences, their fragile towns that crumbled beneath a single raid. He painted them as weak, chained to land they could never truly hold. And each day, she answered. Her voice wavered at times, but she did not yield. She spoke of her father's hands, calloused from building their cabin. She spoke of her mother, raising children in a wilderness that never spared kindness. She defended the courage it took to plant roots in soil that could easily bury you. The more they clashed, the more something else sharpened between them. Not hatred, not mere survival, but respect. Sarah found her voice growing steadier, her fear turning into defiance, and her defiance into strength. She no longer felt like a silent servant kneeling at his side. She felt like herself again, someone who could stand, even if the ground beneath her was foreign. And Kael, though his words cut like steel, did not silence her. He listened. He tested. He pushed. But he never crushed her spirit. One evening, as the fire burned low and shadows stretched long across the lodge, she wiped the cloth gently over the scar across his ribs. His hand moved suddenly, gripping her wrist. His hold was firm, though not cruel. His eyes locked onto hers, unflinching, intense. "Why do you not break?" His voice was low, threaded with curiosity and something deeper. "Others before you begged, cried, fell silent. You burn instead. Why?" Her breath caught. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to pull away, but his gaze held her captive in a way the ropes never had. "Because if I break," she whispered, her voice raw but steady, "then I am nothing, and I would rather be fire than nothing." For a moment, silence wrapped around them. heavy as stone. His eyes searched hers, as though he were weighing the truth of her soul. Then, slowly, so faint, she almost doubted it, his mouth curved, not in scorn, not in cruelty, but into the faintest ghost of a smile. "Fire," he said softly, almost to himself. "Yes, that is what you are." He released her wrist, leaning back into the furs. The weight of his gaze did not soften, but something new lingered in it now. A recognition, a bond. Sarah turned back to her task, her hand trembling, her heart racing. She had won something that night. Not freedom, not victory, but a place in his eyes she had never held before. The wolf of the cliffs no longer saw her as prey, no longer as a child. He saw her as fire. And though she feared what it meant, she felt the spark catch within her, a perilous bond, undeniable and growing stronger with every breath they shared. The valley was restless that night. Sarah felt it before she heard it, the tension in the air, the way the warriors moved, like shadows, the way the women gathered their children close. Then the drums began, low at first, a steady heartbeat, then rising, rolling across the cliffs like thunder. Kael stepped from the lodge, no longer weakened by fever, no longer the wounded man she had tended. His body was whole again. His strength returned, his presence filling the night like fire. His scars gleamed in the torchlight as warriors painted their faces beside him, preparing for war. "The soldiers come," he said simply, his voice carved in stone. Sarah's breath caught. Soldiers, her people. The very flag she had once thought of as protection now rode toward this valley with fire and steel. For weeks she had longed for them, dreamed that they would come, that they would rescue her. But now, her chest tightened with dread instead of relief. She looked at Kael. Every line of him was taut, fierce, unflinching. His eyes burned as they found hers. "When they see you," he told her, his voice low but steady, "they will claim you. They will take you from this lodge, from me. But you are no longer captive. You must choose your people, or your truth." Her heart hammered. She wanted to cry out that she could not choose, that both halves belonged to her, that her blood and her soul were pulling her in two directions at once. But Kael's gaze did not waver. His words had struck the truth she could not deny. The sound of hooves split the night. At the edge of the valley, torches flared. Soldiers poured into the clearing, their shouts sharp in English, their rifles glinting in the firelight. They fanned out, a wall of steel and flame, faces grim with fury. The Apache met them with cries of their own. Arrows knocked, spears lifted high. The valley erupted. Arrows flew like fire through the air. Rifles cracked. Torches spilled sparks into the grass. Smoke and blood mingled in the night as the two worlds collided in chaos. Sarah stumbled to the edge of the lodge, the bowl of water forgotten, the cloth fallen from her hand. She watched as Kael moved like a storm, every muscle coiled, every strike as fierce as the tales her people had once whispered. He was no ghost, no myth. He was fire made flesh. And then her heart stopped. One of the soldiers, his face pale and stunned, pointed through the smoke. His shout rose above the roar of battle. "There, the girl. She's alive." Every head turned. Rifles swung. Not at her, but at the warriors guarding her. The chaos bent toward her presence like a storm drawn to lightning. In that instant, Sarah knew she could no longer hide. She could no longer belong to two worlds. Her feet carried her forward, trembling but steady. She raised her voice above the clash of steel and the cry of war. Stop! The word tore from her throat, ragged and desperate. Stop this! The battle faltered. For a heartbeat? Soldiers hesitated. Apache warriors froze. Sarah's chest rose and fell as she cried again. Louder this time. Her voice breaking but unyielding. I live because of him. She pointed to Kael, who even now stood bloodied and fierce, holding the line against men who once would have called him nothing more than a savage. He saved me, she shouted. He is no beast. He is no savage. If you kill him, you kill the man who gave me back my life. Her words hung in the air like a prayer, trembling, raw. For the first time, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The soldiers stared, caught between duty and doubt. The Apache stilled, their painted faces unreadable. Even the drums seemed to fade into silence. Then the shot rang out. One soldier, his rage unbroken, lifted his rifle and fired. The bullet split the night. Kael staggered. His body jerked as the shot grazed deep across his shoulder. Blood blossomed red against the scars she had touched with her trembling hands. Sarah screamed. Without thought, without fear, she ran to him. Her knees hit the earth as she fell beside him, her hands pressing against the wound, her tears blurring the fire and smoke. No, she cried, her voice breaking into the night. No. Not again. Please. Not again. Kael's face was pale, but his eyes, those fierce, unyielding eyes, remained fixed on hers. His lips curved faintly, blood staining his teeth. His breath rough and shallow. Now they see, he whispered, voice as soft as the wind but steady as stone. Now they know where you belong. Tears streamed down her face as she bent over him, shielding his body with her own. She did not care about rifles, about torches, about the judgment of either side. In that moment, her choice was carved into the night. She had chosen not the walls, not the flag, not the safety of her old world. She had chosen him, the wolf of the cliffs, the man she had bathed, the man she had seen where no one else dared look. And as the storm of battle raged around them, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever came next, her truth had been spoken, and it was him. The battlefield roared around her, steel clashing, arrows flying, torches spilling sparks into the night, but Sarah heard only his voice. Kael's hand, slick with blood, found hers. His grip was steady, unyielding, despite the wound. His breath came shallow, yet his eyes burned with the same fire she had seen from the first moment she entered his lodge. Now they see, he whispered, his words rough but certain. Now they know where you belong. Her chest tightened. She had fought it for days, told herself she was still a daughter of settlers, still bound to the world she had been stolen from. But the truth pressed against her, undeniable. She was no longer captive. She was no longer bound by walls, or flags, or the ashes of her old life. She had chosen not safety, not the promise of rescue, but him, the wolf of the cliffs, scarred and fierce, who had tested her, defied her, and seen her in ways no one else ever had. As she bent over him, shielding his body from the storm of battle, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that the fire between them was not born of fear, nor pity, nor duty. It was choice. It was truth. And though the world might call it forbidden, in that moment, it was the only freedom she had ever known. She had entered the Apache camp as a captive, broken by fire and fear. She had bowed beneath orders, trembling at every glance, certain her life was forfeit. But in Kael's scars, she found not a monster, but a man. In his silence, she found recognition. In his defiance, she discovered her own courage. And in choosing him and standing where love and danger burned as one, Sarah Collins found something greater than any home she had ever lost. She found freedom. If you were Sarah, would you have chosen safety? Or would you have stood beside the man the world called your enemy, even when the choice burned with danger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget like, share, and subscribe to Eagle Eye Apache for more stories of love, courage, and the untamed West.